Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now what we have here is the AtomMan G7 Ti. AtomMan is of course a brand by Minisforum who we've had the pleasure of testing products from many times now. I have what is perhaps an unhealthy obsession with mini PCs at this point, so I always accept their invitation to review the latest releases. You'd be forgiven for thinking that this box is hiding a gaming laptop, and I guess you wouldn't be completely off the mark because the G7 Ti utilises mobile components. It's like a powerful high-end laptop without a display and keyboard, in disguise as a very slim desktop. Before progressing any further, we should mention the price, no point tiptoeing around it. At the time of this upload, the G7 Ti starts at £1,249 bare bones. For that we get an i9-14900HX and RTX 4070 laptop GPU. Configured as I'm demonstrating it today with 32 gigs of 5600MHz DDR5 and a 1TB SSD, it'll cost you £1,349. If you'd rather add your own SSD and memory, then all you need to do is remove a few screws and unclip the side panel to reveal the internals. There's also an i7-14650HX version of the G7 Ti called the G7 Ti SE, which starts at £1,119 at the time of upload. To be honest, for gaming purposes, the 4070 laptop GPU will still reach its maximum potential with the 16-core i7, but the 24-core i9 should dominate in CPU-intensive tasks. If you're a regular viewer, you might be hit with a little deja vu looking at this thing because it bears an aesthetic resemblance to the NUC X i7 we tested back in 2022. It even has an identical stand. Aside from visuals, the G7 Ti retains a feature that I really liked with the old NUC X, and that is this little mode switch button, which will increase power and of course fan noise. We can toggle between performance mode using the pre-installed AtomMan Control Center 2, and it's also here we can play around with different colour modes and settings for the front lighting panel. Hardware temperatures can also be monitored from within this program. Let's talk about performance then. The i9-14900HX has 8 P cores, 16 E cores and 32 threads. The aforementioned switching power mode will make a noticeable difference to the CPU's capabilities, as reflected by the change in the Cinebench R23 score here. Gaming performance is also improved, though by how much will vary on a game-by-game basis. If we use Cyberpunk as an example, hitting the mode switch button will increase power usage, clock speeds and frame rate as seen here, in this case by about 7 to 8 FPS in some areas. It's nice having these power options readily available at the press of a button. Of course I stuck with game mode for the rest of the gameplay benchmarks, but as we jump into some more in-depth metrics, we should talk about the 4070 laptop GPU inside this thing. This 8GB mobile part won't give you 4070 desktop performance, so you might wonder why it actually shares the 4070 name, but I mean, is it even worth questioning at this point? What I do know is that it's still fairly capable, even at 1440p. As with all my benchmarks, I like to stick to native resolution where possible in the hopes of hitting at least 60 FPS. I tend to avoid frame gen, but I am partial to a cheeky bit of DLSS if absolutely necessary. So let's see what this thing can do. As I said before, the 4070 laptop GPU is not comparable to the 4070 desktop GPU. They're essentially two different things entirely, but at 1440p we do still get some solid results. Starting with Counter-Strike 2 then, with the high preset and anti-aliasing turned off, it will default to MSAA with the high preset, so I switched it off, not really necessary here. I'd usually stick with lower settings, but I thought we'd see how it performs when the visuals are turned up a little bit. Not that it looks too different in my opinion. 258 frames per second on average, with a 1% low of 98 and a 0.1% low of 58. Moving on to Baldur's Gate 3 at 1440p with a high preset next. TAA was also enabled and we saw an average of 83 frames per second. As usual, in and around the busier city area here, we did see some drops, which were represented by those percentile figures. The 1% low was 45 and the 0.1% low was 13. I don't think it really matters in a game like this. It's not the fastest paced game out there. It feels okay to play, to be fair. And this is a somewhat decent result for the 4070 laptop GPU. GTA 5 is older, so of course it runs fine even at 1440p with the absolute highest settings. Max advanced settings were also enabled here. I didn't have MSAA on, instead I used FXAA, but we did see 130 FPS. The 1% low was 76 and the 0.1% figure was 68. Starfield at 1440p with a medium preset and 100% rest scale to start with gave us 58 in and around a kilo, so this is quite impressive considering how demanding this area is. The 1% low was 45 and the 0.1% low was 35, so this represents decent consistency throughout our Starfield gameplay period too. This could benefit from DLSS to push us over that 60 FPS threshold, and of course I enabled DLSS quality mode for an average of a very nice 69. The 1% low was 42 and the 0.1% low was 35. That 1% figure was actually a little worse this time around for whatever reason. Red Dead Redemption 2 runs just fine with the ultra textures and everything else set to high. It looks fantastic with these settings, including TAA set to high. The geometry LOD was set to max and the grass LOD or level of detail was set to 2 out of 10. 66 was the average number here, the 1% low was 54 and the 0.1% low was 49. The 4070 laptop GPU is doing a somewhat decent job, but of course it does have just 8 gigs of VRAM too, so for those higher resolutions you may start to see a few problems, as I'll demonstrate a little later on with Cyberpunk. Before that though, we have Once Human, 1440p the high preset for 64 FPS, the 1% low was 55 and the 0.1% low was 36, so 60 plus FPS is doable, though if you want to try and iron out those percentile lows a little more, then we can enable DLSS and set it to quality mode, which will bump our average frame rate up to 92. The 1% low came back as 84 and the 0.1% figure was 71 here. So I mentioned Cyberpunk before. This, of course, will run okay at 1440p with a high preset, no fancy ray tracing effects, for an average of 61 FPS. The 1% low was 49, and the 0.1% low did suffer a little bit, it came in at 18. In order to smooth things out, we can enable DLSS quality mode for 90 FPS on average. Our 1% low was 60, and our 0.1% low was 32. So there is still a bit of a gap between the percentile figures here, but this felt a lot smoother to play this time around. Now for ray tracing, which we can do with the 4070 laptop GPU of course, we saw 53 FPS on average with the RT Ultra preset and DLSS set to balanced, so we are making quite a big sacrifice in terms of that resolution, and I think the VRAM limitation comes into play a little here because we saw a 1% low of 10 and a 0.1% low of 8. So if you look at the VRAM utilization and the amount actually assigned to the game as well, we can see the figures are really creeping up, and I think this does have an impact on performance. Fortnite 1440p to finish then, medium preset with 100% rest scale for an average of 168. The 1% low was 91, and as always with Fortnite we do see the occasional dip or drop. This caused the 0.1% figure to come in at 9 FPS, but overall the experience was decent. There we go, this is the AtomMan G7 Ti. I do really like the way it looks. I said it at the start, it's a bit like a gaming laptop in disguise as a smaller form factor thin desktop. But I think you're going to really have to want this sort of form factor to purchase one of these. There are gaming laptops on the market for similar money and similar specs, but I think it's still a really cool product, quite innovative. I haven't seen anything like this apart from the NUC Xi7 that we looked at before. I am always in anticipation of what product we're going to see next from the AtomMan or Minis Forum lineup, to be fair, and this is certainly very interesting, and I hope it's helped you make a decision as to whether or not one of these is right for you. But as always, I encourage you to leave your thoughts and opinions down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.